Hi guys, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my channel, and in this video I am going to be telling you guys about Jesse Pomeroy, who happens to be a killer from a very young age. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Jesse Pomeroy was born in Charleston, Massachusetts on November 29th, 1859. And right away, he never really fit in with anyone else. He had a defect in his right eye, and it was kind of like a cataract almost. It was like a white, thick, unappealing film covering his pupil. Supposedly, this was in the middle of a smallpox epidemic at the time, and his mother stood by the fact that it had everything to do with the vaccine. Apparently it wasn't all that safe, and so she took him to a small local clinic, and from 1 month old to 6 months old, he was covered in abscesses all over his body, and that included on his eye. However, others claim that this was just from a viral infection that he had as a baby, and that was the cause of this abscess on his eye. He was always bullied by bigger, stronger, and taller kids, which caused him to start bullying smaller, shorter, and weaker kids. He was a loner, and he loved reading novels that included blood, gore, sex, wars, etc. He had a brother, Charles, who was older than him by 17 months, and he actually ignored Jesse in favor of girls. His father, Thomas, beat him with a horsewhip or a leather belt. He would also ask him to get naked quite often so that he could inflict even more pain than he already was. His mother, Ruth, was the only person that really showed more understanding towards Jesse. She thought his issues were all due to him being bullied at school. Even when he began killing and torturing animals, his mother just kind of thought that that was also because of his sadness, which, by the way, that is a major red flag. If you guys are into true crime just like I am, you know that one of the biggest red flags is when somebody starts killing or hurting animals in any way. Before his 10th birthday, he killed his mother's songbirds by chopping off their heads. And later on, he was also caught torturing the neighbor's cat with a knife. In the late 1871, boys began suffering from beatings, and they described their attacker as stronger, taller, and overall bigger than them. Some were even sexually assaulted. He'd befriend them, offer money and treats, then he would take them to a remote location and basically just do unspeakable things to them. He eventually got the nicknames the Boy Torturer and the Red Devil. A description of him was published in the Boston Globe, and his mother Ruth actually recognized it, so she decided to move the family to South Boston. In December of 1871, 4-year-old William Payne was found in an isolated outhouse. And keep in mind, this is when Jesse was only 11 years old. William was hanging from the ceiling by rope tied to his wrists. He was partially undressed and suffering from hypothermia. His skin was turning ghostly white, and his lips were turning blue. His hands were also turning purple from his wrists being tied, and his back was covered in welts, so he was obviously being hit by an object over and over again. He was found by 2 men who heard him whimpering from the inside of a tiny building. The men cut him down and called the police, but William was unfortunately in no place to be able to identify his attacker, so the police kind of just chalked it up to being a one-time accident. February 22nd, 1872, 7-year-old Tracy Hayden was lured to the same exact spot. He was bound the same way, he was beaten, his front teeth were knocked out, his eyes were blackened, his nose had been broken, and Jesse even threatened to cut off his genitals. And he was a little bit more helpful than William was as far as describing the attacker, but the only thing he could say was that he had brown hair. May 20th, 1872, 8-year-old Robert Mayer was promised a trip to Barnum's Circus, but really that was just Jesse luring him to his favorite torture spot. He was stripped, tied up, and beaten with a stick. He was forced to repeat cuss words, and Jesse fondled himself while he was torturing him. Once he was sexually satisfied, he threatened death to him, but he eventually let him go. July 22nd, 7-year-old Johnny Balch, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, was basically treated the exact same way as the previous victim. At this point in the investigation, a $500 reward was offered to anyone who could help get justice for these victims. And they even had citizens who weren't part of law enforcement but wanted to kind of be on the lookout. They were patrolling the streets as well. There was also some information that was given out but was misreported, if that makes sense. For example, it was said that he was a young adult and that he had red hair and a pointy beard. August 17th, 7-year-old George Pratt was basically treated the same way. He was stripped, tied up, and beat, but he was also stabbed with a sewing needle multiple times. And he also got chunks of skin bitten out of his butt and his cheek. September 5th, 6-year-old Harry Austin was kidnapped and assaulted. Jesse also used a pocket knife to stab under his arms and between his shoulders. He was attempting to cut off his genitals, but he was disrupted somehow and fled the scene. September 11th, 7-year-old Joseph Kennedy was stabbed. He was ordered to recite a vulgar version of the Lord's Prayer, but when he refused, he was slashed across the face. And after that was done, Jesse took him to a body of water and cleaned his wounds with salt water. September 17th, 5-year-old Robert Gould was tied to a post at the railroads. He was beaten and slashed with a knife, but he was helpful in identifying his attacker because he mentioned Jesse's white eye. By now, a search was obviously being conducted, and on September 21st, 1872, the police took Joseph Kennedy to Jesse's school to try to get him to identify him. But unfortunately, no identification could be made. However, Jesse did stop in at the police station that day, and this was most likely to outsmart the police. Jesse saw Joseph, so he quickly tried to leave. However, Joseph saw him as well and was able to call him out, and he was arrested on the spot. At this point in the case, he is 13 years old and he was interrogated for hours. He obviously claimed he was innocent, and the police finally contacted his mother. They woke him up after midnight to interrogate him once more, and finally, when they mentioned that he could be in jail for 100 years, he finally confessed. Next day, he was identified by all victims. Jesse even testified, hanging his head, and said, "I just couldn't help myself." He was ordered to a reform school in Westboro until he turned 18. The reform school was harsh, and stronger boys tend to prey on the weak there. Jesse might have been young, but he was not dumb. He knew that if he had good behavior, he could probably get out before he turned 18. With that being said, he was a model prisoner, and he got out in 18 months. March 18th, 1874, only 6 weeks after being released, Jesse was opening his mother's dressmaking shop and brother's newsstand. A boy Jesse knew stopped by to chat, and during this, Katie Grant also showed up, and she asked if Jesse had any notebooks. He told her he only had one left, but it had an ink stain on it, so he said he would only sell it to her for 2 cents. She followed him down to the basement, where he put his arm around her neck and hand around her mouth. He cut her throat with a knife and dragged her behind the toilet. He put stones and ash on her body, and I just want to make this known, he completely severed her head. He tore open her clothing and mutilated her abdomen and genitals. In April, Harry Field was technically a victim, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it definitely could have been. And by now, everyone knows about Jesse pretty much. So when he tried luring boys, one of 2 things would happen. Either A, they would just decline, or B, witnesses would see them together and quickly swoop in to basically save the day and make sure that the boy did not go with Jesse. April 22nd, 1874, 4-year-old Horace Millen got some pennies from his mother to buy some treats from a local bakery. On the way there, however, he ran into Jesse, who suggested that they go to the harbor. Oris still bought his cake and shared it with him. Witnesses saw them together and had a few differing thoughts. One woman thought that Jesse's face looked a little odd for someone just going on a walk to the bakery. Another thought it was odd that two kids were out alone in that area, but Jesse looked responsible to them, so didn't really think much of it either. Jesse also spoke to a boy his age digging for clams, but the boy didn't know Jesse or his reputation, and he thought the two were just brothers. Once they reached a certain spot, Jesse told him that he could rest. As soon as the boy sat down, Jesse pulled out his knife and slashed his throat. Even with all the blood loss, the boy was still alive, and this made Jesse angry, so he just repeatedly, over and over again, stabbed him. He slashed through his windpipe, and that's when he was instantly killed. His fists were curled so tight that his fingernails were embedded in his palms. Jesse still kept going, stabbing his genitals and piercing his eye. Jesse's boot prints were found next to Oris's body. They went to question Jesse, where they found blood on his clothes and scratches on his body. April 24th, 1874, he was arrested. At first, he gave a very detailed explanation for his alibi, but the police also noticed some marshy grass, like mush, on the soles of his shoes. They asked if he had a knife, and he said that he did at home, so they grabbed that for evidence as well. Jesse continued to deny his involvement, and Captain Henry Dyer was one of the people who supported his early release from the reform school. He told Jesse that if he was innocent, he would go to the funeral home and see Oris's body. Jesse said no, he didn't want to do that, but they forced him to anyway. And at that, he had confessed, broke down, and he said, "I'm sorry, I did it. Please don't tell my mother." Because of the arrest, his mom had sold her shop to get more money, and the new tenants found Katie's body. Ruth and Charles were taken into custody for questioning, and at this rate, they were also going to be charged with basically being accomplices to murder. But once Jesse found that out, he confessed to Katie's murder as well, and they let his parents go. He described the murder in perfect detail, and when he was asked why he did it, he just responded with, "I don't know, I wanted to see how she would act." In Massachusetts, death by hanging was the punishment for murder, but nobody ever killed or hung a child before. The trial began December 9th, 1874, shortly after Jesse's 15th birthday. His lawyer decided to drop the innocent plea and go for the insanity reasoning instead. The jury rejected it but offered leniency because of his age instead. However, the judge disagreed and sentenced him to death. But the governor's office said that he was too young and refused to sign the judge's order. They gave him life in solitary confinement after 1 to 2 years. I only say 1 to 2 years because I saw different sources said 1, different sources said 2 years, and at 16 years old, he was incarcerated at the Massachusetts State Prison on September 7th, 1876. For the next 41 years, he only was able to socialize with the guards that would patrol his cell and his mother, who visited once a month until she died. He tried escaping at least a dozen times, and he almost succeeded when he rerouted a bunch of gas pipes in his cell to cause an explosion. But instead, he just kind of got all discombobulated, and he was really in no state of mind to actually make the escape. In 1917, Jesse was able to join the rest of the inmates, and he was no longer in solitary confinement. In 1929, at 71 years old, his health started going downhill. He was moved to the Bridgewater prison farm. 2 or 3 years later, he died from a heart attack shortly before his 73rd birthday on September 29th, 1932. He spent 58 years in prison. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. I don't really care. Subscribe if you're new. Comment down below videos you would like to see next. Let me know what you guys thought on this case. I just can't imagine starting my life off on the wrong foot at such a young age, and then honestly being in and out of these different places as a punishment, and then being locked up for your entire life basically. I just don't know how he didn't go crazy. Maybe he did, I don't really know, but I would have actually lost my mind. And instead of trying to escape, I probably would have been contemplating other things. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!